Hey, Brett, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Brian. Thanks again for having me.
So, Brett, before we kick off, maybe you could give our listeners a little bit of background about you and how you came up and what it is that you do at Bastille.
Sure, yeah. My background is I'm an electrical engineer. Studied signal processing, electromagnetics, a lot of geeky stuff like that. Got my PhD in double E in MIMO communications. It's an aspect of wireless yeah, from Georgia Tech, and worked at Georgia Tech for a while as the director of the software-defined radio lab. About 3 years ago or so, I joined Bastille to look at the security side of wireless, which was a bit eye-opening for me and has been ever since. So kind of on a roller coaster ride here with Bastille, and we're having a good time.
I'm just wondering, in an academic situation, you're working with your peers and, probably some undergrad and master students as well. Is security something that's part of the curriculum, or is it part of the common research when people are, working, in this field in wireless?
That's a good question. From my perspective, it wasn't built in. I was exposed to it only because of the way that we did our research. We would cross-pollinate with other disciplines quite a bit. We did a lot of applied research contracts. And so I learned a bit about I learned a bit about security through rubbing shoulders with experts in the field, but it wasn't part of my curriculum.
Yeah.
That may have changed, but I don't see a lot of I haven't historically seen a lot of connections between wireless and security, and that's part of what Bastille is trying to overcome, is to help people be more aware of the problems of wireless and bring visibility to it.
Yeah, so let's double click on that then. So, what's Bastille's value proposition? If somebody wants to, leverage a solution like Bastille, what are their motivating factors? What are they trying to address?
Sure. Well, hopefully they're trying to shore up their security posture and lock the side door. And they spend a lot of time locking the front door, but they've got this side door that is pretty wide open unless they start to bring visibility to it.
Yeah.
And I think the first step really is bringing the principles of zero trust into play across the network, including wireless. And the first step of that is know what you have. And very often we simply don't. There's so much wireless around. We're swimming in it all the time, and we just don't have visibility. So Bastille is a system and process whereby we can bring visibility to wireless. We have systems that we deploy around a facility that we want to monitor, and they scan the spectrum, detecting wireless packets, including cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth Classic, Bluetooth Low Energy, and IoT protocols, and slam all that stuff together. They're detecting the headers of the packets. They're decoding those headers and extracting fields that allow them to understand identity, connectivity, behavior. And then they work together to localize each individual device. So then we know with in near real time, within just a few seconds, like 5 or 6 seconds, we know where devices are in the facility at all times. And then we've got historical information because it all goes into a database. So as soon as you turn the system on, it starts detecting and localizing everything. And now we start to see what's happening and who's connected to who's talking, where in the location. So all that stuff is available to
So
begin
these
your.
are these are software-defined radios. These are physical devices. These are things that you
Yes.
install in walls or ceilings throughout a facility in order to, and I'm glad you brought it up, in order to track wireless, which doesn't just mean Wi-Fi. It does mean Wi-Fi, but it means cellular and Bluetooth and Zigbee and everything in between.
Right.
Uh, how long does it generally take a customer to get turned? Let's say, okay, I want this. I want to secure this facility. Maybe it's an office or a floor. Is this something that takes quarters or months or years to deploy, or what's the deployment like?
Well, ideally, it takes less than a day to set everything up, but it depends on the
Wow.
size of your network. You really just need Ethernet to every sensor that's deployed, and that will provide power as well as data backhaul to the server.
Okay.
So as soon as you can get those systems installed, now granted, some of our larger installations have taken some time. They've taken on the order of weeks just because we have like hundreds of sensors or 1,000 or so, and they've got to go everywhere. But really, it's just a matter of
Weeks is nothing.
deploying and plugging everything in.
Yeah, when you say weeks, coming from, I cut my teeth on the sim space with products like ArcSight, where we measured POCs in quarters, if not years. So
Mm,
weeks
yeah,
is like opening up the front door for
yeah,
something
yeah.
that's actually hardware. That's interesting. And we've spoken about this before, but there's a few different solutions. I know there's the typical sensor array that you talk about deploying that's monitoring all the wireless bands, but there's also a focus on executive protection, and then there's flyaway kits as well. So there's a few different kind of like specialized things that you can do as well. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's a number of use cases. Permanent installations would be what I was referring to earlier. You mentioned flyaway kits. We do have some customers who have portable kits where their use cases are things like they want to deploy in the military, they might deploy forces, but before they do, they want a baseline of the RF environment. So they'll deploy a portable system, or commercial space, they might have some commercial event and they want to baseline the RF environment so they can protect the people that are attending that event. They're going to be on stage. They want to protect their systems from being attacked. So they just want that visibility. But most of our customers, I think, are looking at permanent deployments. We call them enterprise deployments, where you have that persistence of presence. So you can see information over the course of years. And we have customers who have literally acquired data over 3 to 5 years and they just never throw it away. So that persistence is really useful in the case that something is identified down the road. You can look back in time, do forensic analysis of the wireless space, including all the other stuff that you might want to do to inform your investigation.
Yeah, I love that because you can say, "Oh, I saw this thing here, and then 3 weeks ago we saw that same exact thing over there. Why is it in
Yeah,
these two locations, or what's the driver there?" And
exactly.
we had talked a couple weeks back about um, what I think is a relatively simple use case, which is eavesdropping, and this notion that it's so easy to have audio, video, or audio and video devices. Let's just take an executive conference room to make the example simple. I know there's Bluetooth speakers out there with sort of stealth hidden cameras involved, and they have their own power supply, so you don't need to plug them in. There's security cameras that run off of a cellular network. They actually have a SIM card that goes in. Some of
Hmm.
them can even be solar powered, so those can be kind of off grid and stored, and they're recording everything to the cloud. We also talked about even like Apple AirPods, right? You can leave a pair of AirPods sitting on the table, which nobody would notice. People forget them, lose them, drop them all the time. And that could actually be picking up communication, audio communication, transmitting it via Bluetooth to a smartphone, probably a iPhone or a Android, and that could be, in the next room, down the hall, maybe in the parking lot. There's like so many ways. You don't need to go to a Spicer. You don't need Q from James Bond to give you a backpack full of stuff anymore. You just need to go
No.
to, Best Buy or Amazon to pick up these devices. Uh,
Yeah, it's much easier today than James Bond. So yeah, you gave some great examples. The only thing I would add would be hearing aids that have Bluetooth enabled. You're
there you
walking around with them and you can literally be porting everything you hear to your phone and storing it or backhauling it over cellular. So yeah, anything that has either a microphone or a video camera and some kind of wireless connectivity, it could be Bluetooth, could be Wi-Fi, could be cellular, anything is a potential surveillance device. And so whether that's in government, we have a lot of customers who are very concerned about people listening in on sensitive conversations in certain places, whether it's in government or whether it's in secure computing facilities or data centers or boardrooms. You mentioned executive protection is one use case that we solve for, but any of these other kinds of use cases where people care about information that's being conveyed visually or verbally, those devices become a threat. And then, of course, there's all of the data on your network, and we care about wireless access to the network itself. So we're trying to monitor that and bring visibility into bad behavior, alerting on something that looks suspicious or threatening based on its wireless behavior.
Yeah, and to me, one of the most interesting things about these types of attacks, or these threats, I should say, that are within your environment, is the fact that they are out of band. By out of band, what I mean is they're not necessarily going over the corporate network, either the
Right.
wired or wireless network, right? Like we talked about the cellular enabled security camera or Bluetooth. These are devices without IP addresses, or if they have an IP address, maybe it's they got it from some wireless hotspot, right? That they're pulling in. But regardless of where it's coming from, it's not crossing your security controls, your network systems, your IT security controls, everything kind of in between that you've deployed in your environment. This is all kind of existing as an aside. So solutions like Sevco, for example, when we're looking at assets and threats and vulnerabilities, we're pulling it in from all these known sources. Here's a laptop, here's a virtual machine, here's a printer, an application, identity. These are all things that are on the network that are identifiable or have IP addresses or integrated in other devices that do have IP addresses. It's just there. But all of this isn't there. There's
Right.
all these unknowns, kind of like this dark realm that's like coexisting with this. And to me, that's a really scary thing. And I'm wondering, you go into a lot of public and private sector organizations. Of course, Bastille is deployed in organizations around the world. Do people get this? Are they like, oh yeah, I know this is a threat, or does it still take a little bit of evangelism and education to help them understand what the threat is? And I'm just wondering, are we there yet? And they're like, got it, or you got to help me get there.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Brian. The answer is yes and no. That we kind of get it and we kind of don't. And it partly depends on your background. So, the US government, for example, most of those people get it because they've been living it for decades. Post World War II, we've had surveillance issues, electronic surveillance, that the government has been keenly aware of, partly because they conduct it, but partly because they see it conducted against them. So they want to defend against that, and they get the threat. In the commercial world, it takes a bit more education. So, and it depends on who you are. So if you've been exposed to some of those threats before, you may already partially get it and doesn't take a lot of convincing. But there's some great stories out there about threatening behavior it's so straightforward to do. It's fairly simple. I mean, there's off-the-shelf devices that you can buy for fairly cheap that you can go and conduct attacks. I mean, a simple example, we've seen a behavior in data centers where a hotspot comes in to a data hall and routinely connects over some period of time, periodically connects to a client that's sitting in a rack, which then can backhaul data over cellular.
Mm.
This this obviates all of the security infrastructure that they have in place, and there's no visibility into it until Bastille comes in and says, hey, this is what's happening. But it's really pretty straightforward to do. It's not hard. Then you've got things like a Wi-Fi pineapple that conduct evil twin attacks to crack credentials and penetrate networks. And that's been done a number of times in various ways. And most recently, we've seen a Wi-Fi attack from across the world where Russia was able to penetrate a target network using something called a nearest neighbor attack, where you don't have to be close in. So examples like this and Bluetooth tethering used to exfiltrate data. There are so many simple things that are readily available. You don't have to be a really sophisticated attacker in order to implement them. Um,
You don't
but
have to be sophisticated, and you're just counting on organizations to be lackadaisical when it comes to this, or just maintain their level of ignorance about these types of attacks and
right.
focus on just what they know. I can't tell you how important that is when we look at things from a Sevco perspective. There's a lot of unknowns because organizations are just getting information from one type of endpoint security or this EDR integrating with this SOAR. There's rarely 100% coverage. And when they start taking a platform like Sevco and pulling everything in, it really opens their eyes up to these massive gaps that aren't necessarily difficult to address. It's just that they didn't know it wasn't there. We
Yeah.
tell people it's not usually that you have a bad EDR, it's that your EDR wasn't installed. It's not that you're patching too slow, is that there's no patching agents or IT management agents on those actual devices. That's what's actually limiting you.
Right.
Um, CrowdStrike's great about telling you where CrowdStrike's installed, but it's not great at telling you where CrowdStrike's not installed. And to me, Bastille is the same thing. It's giving information regarding all of these unknowns, these things that we wouldn't find with a vulnerability scanner, we wouldn't find with other types of security controls, endpoint, network management, and so on and so forth. It's that other realm. And I love it because it paints a much more complete picture. And to your point, I think it's something people are starting to pick up on more. This
Mhm.
isn't these attacks have been around for a while, to your point, post World War II. But now I think people are starting to really, really perk up when it comes to this. And I'm glad to see that there's companies out there like Bastille that are leading the charge and have been so successful for so long in this space.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I
Awesome.
think visibility is key. You can't defend against what you can't see. And that's step one. And then you want to automate the response after that.
Absolutely. Well, Brett, thank you so much. This was great. And by the way, Brett mentioned these remote attacks through Wi-Fi from thousands of miles away by Russian APTs. We have another podcast that the link will be below, and you guys can check that as well. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Brian.